TD Ryan Unleashed is brought to you by Scott Zimet, your State Farm Insurance agent in DeKalb. Call 815-748-3101 or stop by at 2587 Sycamore Road, Suite D in DeKalb. Like a good neighbor, Scott Zimet and State Farm are there. Pizza Villa, pizza, pasta, sandwiches, and more at 824 West Lincoln Highway in DeKalb. Don't forget Kids Eat for Free on Thursday. For delivery or pickup, go to pizzavilla.com or call 815-758-8116. Elder Care Services of DeKalb. Safe, secure, and supported, helping you stay in home where you want to be. Call 815-758-6550 or stop in at 1701 East Lincoln Highway in DeKalb or on the web at ecsdecalb.org. My Insurance Guy in Sycamore covers Medicare to auto care and everything in between. Stop by at 204 South Main Street in Sycamore. Call 815-899-0950 or online at myinsuranceguy.com. And welcome into TD Ryan Unleashed, podcast number 57, Honored and Privileged. I know I always say honored and privileged, but truly honored and privileged to have our special guest today, Harlan Hawkins. Who is Harlan Hawkins, you ask? Well, Harlan is a gentleman who has been cleaning, let's read it from the paper, has refurbished gravestones of nearly 4 dozen veterans who lie beneath the DeKalb County. His work is the reason why many names can be read by cemetery visitors. And honored and privileged to have with us right now, Harlan Hawkins. Harlan, welcome, and again, thank you for what you've done for our veterans. And obviously, according to this article, you will continue to do.
Yes, actually, I was there this morning working on I found one new one. Well, I got involved with this with the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War when I discovered that I actually had a Civil War veteran, my great-great-grandfather, and William Cable. He was in Brush Creek, Ohio, served in the 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry.
Okay.
And after the war, like many, came back. He was restless. He left Ohio and came west to Southern Illinois and married, and his daughter, Florence, is my great-grandmother.
Oh, really? Okay.
So I was able to make that connection, and the Sons of Union Veterans, they meet once a month out at the History Center. And just happened to line up with one of our meetings that Rob Glover, the chief archivist out there, had opened a box that had been moved over at some point from the courthouse and discovered the journals of the Grand Army, the Republic Post, that was in Sycamore. There were about 8 posts around the county. The Merritt Simon's post was the one here in DeKalb. And later on, they started in 1866 as an organization down in, the first post was in Decatur.
So right after the Civil War got over?
Yes.
Next year, okay.
Actually, they were thinking about, there was a gentleman, Benjamin Franklin Stevenson, who was the regimental surgeon for the 14th Illinois Infantry, and was remarking on the camaraderie of these young men and all they'd been through and all they experienced. And he said it would surprise him if they did not want to continue these relationships, this camaraderie after the war, because they had experienced things and done things and seen things that none of their contemporaries who stayed home had.
Mm-hmm.
Their shared experience. And I suppose that's the same in all combat situations.
Well, I was just relaying the story to my previous guest, is that we do a suicide prevention show, and I had a veteran on, and he was talking about being in Vietnam and got a letter, one of his buddies got a Dear John letter, and there's about 5 of them sitting around, and he just took his rifle, he called it swallowing his rifle, and just shot himself right there in front of the other 4 buddies. And they all had to go back to home and try to regain a normal life, after witnessing something like that. And I know the Civil War, there were stories about amputations and just piles of arms and legs and just
all true.
And how could you witness that and not, so to witness that with somebody, you can't imagine a closer camaraderie than you would have.
Well, and not just witnessing it, experiencing it.
Yeah.
And some of my I call them my guys that are out there. I began to connect with them on an individual basis through these journals, and they are the post in Sycamore. And they that idea of calling them posts continues now. You have VFW Post, American Legion Post. It began with the Grand Army.
Wow.
And it the one in Sycamore and started in 1875, I believe. That's the earliest notes in these 3 volumes. And they're more than notes. They're not like bullet points where it's just a snapshot. Much of it is full-on narrative, handwritten. And it really, I mean, it puts you in the meeting as these guys, they met twice a month early on Thursday evenings. And they that idea of concern for each other that had gotten them through the war. They had a charity committee that they staffed. They had an employment committee. A veteran needed work. They were networking before that was a term.
Yeah. Because you came home, you had the church, you had your family, right? There wasn't
Yeah.
much other support system there.
And there wasn't. And there was not a VA. A very rudimentary pension system was administered by the Department of the Interior.
Didn't they have to march on Washington to get that pension, as I recall?
Well, many of them did.
Yes.
Yeah, they and in their notes, as that heats up, they have resolutions to senators and representatives saying, this is a concern we have. And these were young men. There were about 2,300 from DeKalb County at a time when the population was much lower than now.
Yeah.
And
So proportionally, we had a lot of volunteers.
yes,
didn't we? Yeah.
yes. And
But to take the time, I was just talking to a young lady who her favorite author is Anne Frank, and Anne Frank hoped that somebody would find her diary and then actually redid the diary so it would be more readable and then here these guys are writing things down, not knowing that anybody will ever see it again.
no, this is, and they make references to resolutions that are filed in the records, and those records don't exist. It is absolute, just luck, if that's the right word, that these things even exist at all on 2 levels.
Yeah. To preserve, right? That they're still around.
Preserve, yes.
Yeah.
The rules were when a post disbanded for lack of quorum or whatever reason, the records and their charter were to be boxed up and sent to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for storage. But for some reason, these weren't. And the fact that the post disbanded finally at about 1920. They could no longer get a quorum, and these guys were age and infirmity was taking their toll.
Sure, right.
And early on, when a member died, they would have they'd have a memoriam page in their record where they would say, where he was born. A lot of these guys came from the East Coast, New York and Pennsylvania and Maine. They came out here as kids often with their parents. H.C. Whittemore, Henry Clay Whittemore, came from New York, as did General Everell F. Dutton, who was from Sycamore, started out as a lieutenant, I believe, in the 13th Illinois, wound up in the very last days of the war as a brigadier general in the 105th Illinois. The 13th, the 105th, the 42nd, and you can't miss the 8th Illinois Cavalry. They were unique in that they were in the Eastern Army. They were DeKalb County, Kane County, and some from DuPage County. And commander was named John Farnsworth, Farnsworth Avenue. And
I always loved finding out what they were like. Altgeld Hall. I just read it was Governor Altgeld that was
Yes.
held. I didn't know that.
a very stern-looking fellow, by the way. But they were everywhere in the East. In fact, it was a lieutenant from the 8th Illinois Cavalry. It's documented, fired the first shot at Gettysburg.
Oh, wow.
With a borrowed carbine.
What a story.
His
Wow.
house still stands. It's a lawyer's office now in, I believe, Geneva.
Okay.
But the recruiting officers came and they went to schools and they went to churches and so these men, young men, 70% were under the age of 20. they all knew each other when they enlisted. When I see 105th Illinois Infantry Company A, I know those guys were all neighbors. They were schoolmates. There was a whole crew from Mayfield Township that enlisted. One of the stones I worked on this
And people
morning-
they would enlist in groups when they were together, like a family, 4 brothers would enlist together, right?
Yes. There are 3 together at Elmwood, the Hawkins, Reuben and
Let's see how
Orator, and
right, and Linus, Order, and
yes,
Reuben. Yeah.
Yes. And now Linus isn't there. Linus was killed in North Carolina and is buried in North Carolina.
Okay.
They didn't bring him back. But he has a marker out there. It's called a cenotaph. It's a memorial marker. And
Is that what those are called? Like we went out to Gettysburg, my wife and I, and you walk the fields of Gettysburg, and all of a sudden there's a marker, a 2-ton marker right there. Isn't it?
well, a cenotaph is for a person who's remembered there but not buried there.
Okay.
The fellow for whom the post in Sycamore, Horace Potter, he was a major. He was the regimental surgeon. And everything that I've read about him, he was a wonderful fellow. And he was moving a hospital facility forward during a battle in part of the Atlanta campaign in 1864. And a bursting shell, big fragment, struck him in the head and killed him.
Oh, wow.
And there was just this universal depression that went across the unit. He was just a wonderful fellow. His was brought back, and he's buried in DuPage.
What was the norm then? If and you're in the Civil War and you get killed in Georgia or anywhere you might be fighting, you probably going to be buried there, right?
Yes. And they later on gathered them up and moved them into national cemeteries. That's where Merritt Simons, the fellow for whom the DeKalb post is named, he was. This is a remarkable story, and there's going to be more coming out of that. And there's a young fellow writing about that at the History Center. He was severely wounded in the legs at the Battle of Chickamauga in September of 1863, and his unit moved back, and he lay out there for days.
Oh,
With several, and he writes about the enemy brought him water and blankets and kept them going. And after several days, they came forward, got them. And he continued to write in his diary as he lay out there.
Oh, my gosh.
And he had the presence of mind, but he couldn't move, couldn't crawl. And after a number of days, the Union came back, picked him up, and took him back. His one wish was to be brought back to DeKalb and buried with his mother. And he didn't get that wish.
Oh, wow.
He's buried in Tennessee.
But he kept writing in his journal as he's injured,
did.
laying there
And
in the field.
The journal was picked up by a friend and sent back. And it exists yet.
Wow.
But their family farm was out on the southeast corner where the Del Monte facility was.
Okay.
And there he wanted to be buried in it's the cemetery at 7th and Taylor.
Okay.
I forget what that was called. But he didn't get that wish. So some of the officers often got brought back, and others were brought back after the war.
Okay.
But just 3 of the guys that come to mind out there. One is John W. Burst. His grave marker says lieutenant, but all the records say major. He was in the 105th. The 105th was heavily engaged during the Atlanta campaign, and he was.
That was the March to the Sea, right?
Yes.
Sherman? Yeah.
Yeah, the March to the Sea came after the capture of Atlanta. And Atlanta was, they dug in and just sort of kept pounding the city until the city was kind of basically surrendered, abandoned, Confederates left. And he was struck in the lower leg with a chunk of shell, exploding artillery shell. And he endured 3 amputations before they got it right. And this incredible wagon ride to the hospital in Nashville from Atlanta, Georgia. And but he came back,
Well, you're on
his
the
life.
plane complaining that it's too cold. Yeah, how would you like go with an amputation across on a bumpy wagon?
Yeah, and they had to do it 3 times.
Oh my God.
His grave marker is out there, and he was actually the driving force behind starting the post, the Horace Potter post in Sycamore. And he there's a photograph of his house that exists, and there's like 11 steps going up to the front door. Now, if I was missing a leg, I want a ground floor.
Right.
But these guys were just doggone tough.
They were. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's amazing.
Another fellow that was his markers out there, and I have to wash it every time I go because there's all this bare soil around it, and when it rains, it splashes mud up on it. But his name is DeWitt Green. He was a sergeant again in the 105th, and they were digging breastworks, and he suddenly said he felt this paralyzing pain in his left side. And he went down and was paralyzed, laying there. And there were a couple of observers, one of which was General Dustin. There are 3 generals out there, General Dustin, General Dutton, and General Partridge. And Dustin and Dutton were together during this Atlanta campaign. And they said they saw him spin around, and the bullet hit the ground behind him. It came through the lower part of his left lung.
Oh my gosh.
And they took him off the field, and the medical staff said, "Well, you're a goner," and they just sort of set him in the line with all of these other hopeless cases. And he didn't die. He'd been a farmer up by Kingston at the time he enlisted, and they put him on a train in a boxcar just on the wooden floor of the boxcar and they shipped him, and no food, no water, no care, because they figured these guys were going to die.
Right.
And he said all he could do was turn his head and cough up blood from this lung wound. And when they got him to Nashville, they opened it up, and 3 people had died in there, but the rest of them were still alive. You ever seen a Civil War bullet?
I have, yes.
The size of your thumb.
Yeah.
And that's a big hole. And he's got this sucking chest wound from this giant hole, and he's bleeding and bouncing on this railroad car. Gets there, he's still alive. So they figured, okay, we'll bandage him up. And when they got his coat open, he's just full of fly larvae. But that might have kept it clean enough.
Oh, my
It didn't
gosh.
get infected.
Wow.
And he said he couldn't hardly do anything but raise his head for 3 months. And then they got him up and moving around. And he recovered enough. He did not get to go back to his unit because his lung was bad and his arm was almost useless.
And he wanted to go back.
And he wanted to go back.
Okay.
But he stayed long enough that he was able to be mustered out with the unit. He did not have to leave early. And that was a point of pride with him.
Wow.
He came back to Sycamore, and he ran a restaurant and then a confectionery. And they said he was always in very good spirits. And he expired, I think, 1915, 1916.
Wow.
So when they said it was a fatal wound, it was. It just took years for it to happen.
Wow, and you talk about the
50
medical
years.
horrors there. I remember seeing a picture in a Civil War book of a gentleman who had his jaw blown off.
Yeah.
And he lived, but without a lower jaw. Just the picture still haunts me to this day. What people had to go through is amazing. So, Harlan, we have 144 Civil War veterans buried in DeKalb County.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right now? So you decide.
Well, no, in Elmwood Cemetery.
Just in the Elmwood Cemetery.
There
Okay.
are dozens more that I've been kind of locating. The last.
Well, tell us how you got started. How did you get started doing this? Now you're going to clean off these grave markers.
I got started because I got involved. I've always been interested in the Civil War. I got a book when I was 7 years old, back in the centennial, 1963, called the How and Why Book of the Civil War, and there was something about that connected. And I studied and read and visited battlefields. I went to Gettysburg. I went to Vicksburg. I went to Stones River and Franklin. I want to get down to Shiloh, which was my great-great-great-grandfather's first battle.
Wow.
The 53rd Ohio did not do well in that fight because their commander ran away screaming and tried to resign, and Sherman said, "Resign, hell, you're fired." But yeah, and then I wound up retired in
And what'd you do for a living? What'd you?
I worked for Del Monte
Okay.
Foods. I was the when I retired, I was the farm superintendent for the all vegetable production down in Mendota.
Okay.
And I'd done that for 44 and a half years. And then Del Monte decided to close everything, and suddenly
Well, you handed your walking papers.
I was unprepared for retirement. But
So you have this extra time on your hand now.
yes.
Okay.
So now I start looking at my own history, discovered my great-great-grandfather, connected with the History Center and Sons of Union Veterans. And that's one of the things they do is they want to make sure these guys are remembered. That they, Memorial Day was their idea. Decoration Day started in 1868, I believe, was
Okay.
the first time. And May 30th was the chosen date because this was a time before commercial florists. Flowers had to be, they called it was Decoration Day, where in all the literature for years they say we strew the graves with flowers. And they would put evergreen arbors around the arches going into the cemetery. They enlisted the young folks of the neighborhood. They had to go out into the prairies and the woodlots and gather all these flowers because they weren't, that was the only way you got flowers.
Right.
And so they would make sure every grave had flowers on it, and then they would have an urn for the unknowns, that they would remember them.
Okay.
And they had, initially, it was simply just meet at the cemetery. And then over time, the public really adopted it. It did not become a national holiday, I don't think, until the 1970s. It just was something that everyone did.
Uh-huh.
And it became Memorial Day over time. But they had massive parades. They always put a thank you in their notes to the people who joined them on their parades. The Odd Fellows and a group called the Modern Woodsmen of America, which was really an insurance company, but they all marched with axes. The police, the fire department, the Sycamore Cigar Makers Union. Who knew that Sycamore had a cigar makers union? But the Odd Fellows and the Masonics, the Masonic lodges, all came out, and they would have church services. They would have events on the courthouse lawn, and they'd go out to the cemetery. And they always, one of the first things that the Potter Post did in Sycamore was create a roll of honor. All those who had died in the service, not necessarily in combat. Many of them died of disease. Germ theory hadn't been discovered yet. These guys are drinking out of ponds and eating, questionable food. When they excavate Civil War trash pits, one of the most common glassware is pepper sauce and mustard jars. I suppose it took something like that to cover the taste of, bacon that had been running around in your backpack for a month.
Well, you talk about the crude. I remember reading, I think it was Harrison was the first president that was assassinated, and he had a bullet in him. And the doctors were reaching in there to try to find the bullet, and they'd bring in other doctors. None of them washed their hands.
Right.
So he died of an infection. They said he would have lived. They could have left the bullet in there. He would have lived. But they're reaching it because they didn't know, right? I mean,
No.
what they're doing.
And in this case, if there was any kind of, if the doctor washed his hands, it was after the surgery.
Afterwards, yeah.
And they would wash and reuse bandages. I suppose it was just a supply issue, but still, when you think about that.
Yeah.
But some of these guys, like DeWitt Green, he lived. Another fellow, Richard Anson Smith, he came from New York. He settled in Cortland. He was a grain buyer. He enlisted in the 13th Illinois Infantry. Quickly became a captain, and his family kept everything. His letters before and after the war. He was at the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou, and I don't know what manner of missile caused the wound, but everything says his right arm was shot off. and he tied it off and continued to fight until he passed out.
Wow.
Came back. There are that was in December of 1862. That was part of the Vicksburg campaign. And as you read about the 13th Illinois down there, they stayed in the fight, but he was one that came back, and there were a number that were killed in that engagement. He came back, and there are 2 letters from Army doctors saying, you have to let this guy out of the service. He was shot through the thigh. He can't march. He's missing his right arm. He can't load a musket. You need to let him go home. And they finally, in July of 63, wounded in December of 62, they finally said, okay, well, if you've got to go home, go home. And he came back he moved from Cortland. He was initially a police magistrate in Cortland. They called it Pampas back then. And he moved to Sycamore, where his house still stands. And he served, I think, 5 terms as the county treasurer. And after that, he became the administrator of the county farm. And after that stint, I mean, he's doing all this. He keeps copious notes. And I have looked at his letters, and either he was left-handed to start with, or
with losing the arm, yeah.
Yeah, and because his writing changes a little bit, and then it smooths out again. And there's not much difference between the left, before the losing the arm and after the arm. And in about 1875, he gets restless, and he decides to pull up stakes and go to Lake City, Iowa, where he takes up farming. And I'm thinking, how does a one-armed guy harness a team of horses? But he did, and got along, and he became the postmaster out there. But when he died, they brought him back here. His grave is in Elmwood. And there's a lot of his material that his family brought, and it's in the archives. His sword belt and his sash, his shoulder straps.
That's great. Okay, now let's talk about the actual. Hawkins began his effort in late 2023. He said he worked on about 10 tombstones at a time. He said it takes about 4 weeks to go through the process of cleaning the tombstones. So now, during the Civil War, was there a standard marker that was used?
There was not until probably the 1870s.
Okay.
And yes, there is an identifiable marker. And there are notes in the records that these markers are available, and they're when one of their members dies, because again, this is before funeral homes generally.
Right.
So funerals took place in the home.
In the person's home, okay.
In the person's home, or in the home of a friend if they did not have the facilities for that. The Grand Army, there is a funeral ritual in the records. Oftentimes there would be a preacher. Congregational and Universalist were 2 of the most often mentioned. But then especially in the early years, they would carry the casket, and they had 25 muskets that they used for the salute at the grave.
Oh, so that goes back that far,
Yes.
the salute, okay.
Yeah. And after that, they would all process back to the man's home, and they would, sit with the grieving family. But 2 would spend the first night armed vigil at the cemetery.
Oh, really? Wow.
It was really a special thing to remember their service. And they would put a memoriam page in the records describing where he was from and what his service was and when he joined the post. And they would say things like, the last trumpet call, answered the last summons. My favorite, I think, is where they say, he entered that narrow room whose green door never opens out.
Well, there's one I haven't heard.
Yeah. And they...
So most of the epitaphs, were there epitaphs?
No.
They weren't,
No.
okay.
There is the name, sometimes including the rank. There is the regiment and the company. That's just about all it is.
Okay.
It'll say Lieutenant John W. Burst, Company A, 105th Illinois Volunteer Infantry, and it's in a shield on this kind of slightly arched tombstone. And Confederate grave markers are very similar, but they have a point.
Okay.
And the joke is that that's to keep Yankees from sitting on them. But yeah, and they're about probably fewer than half have the government stones out there. There are many family grave markers that will have the unit and the service.
So as we walk through the Elmwood Cemetery, would we know that that was a veteran? That was a veteran there? Is there an
Many
indication?
of you
Okay.
would. Other than that, sometimes you just have to know they're there.
And that's what you do with the walks when you walk around and
Yes, yeah, and I find them, and it's a matter. I'm not sure what the material is. Maybe it's marble. I don't know. Some of it doesn't weather very well, and
well, I should point out you don't power wash, right? Because you couldn't
No.
use a power washer, could you?
you can't use really anything abrasive.
Okay.
I fill up gallon jugs of water and stick it in the back of my Forester, and I go out there. I'll give it a good soaking because there is this gray-green lichen that clings to it, and you have to.
So this is labor intensive, is it not?
It is. It is. And I was out for 2 hours this morning, and I think I did 6 initially. And
So take us through the process. You said what's the first
So-
thing you do?
first thing I do is soak the whole thing with water,
Okay.
and then I have a very soft brush that it's a there's the temptation. Some people would say, "Well, get a brass brush," and you can't do that. It's a very soft brush, and I just kind of work in and knock all the much of the foliage.
What you call lichen? The stuff
Yeah,
that's
it's like
like
it just
okay.
when it gets wet, it turns into a paste. And I brush all that off, and I flush it, and I brush it, and I flush it. And the last thing I do when I've removed as much as I can, there's often a gray staining left behind. There's something called wet and forget, and it's an approved material by the Veterans Administration for cleaning these stones, and because they still own the stones. And
Did you have to ask permission to do that, or is that
well, it happened. I was out with the Sons group on Memorial Day one time when we do we lay a flower at the mourning house for all of them, and all the lost veterans, and John Boyes of whose family started that cemetery back in 1865 had commented that it might be a good project for the Sons to clean these stones. And I, being freshly retired and wondering what I'm going to do with my time, I latched onto that. And not having no idea about the rabbit tracks that these would lead me down.
right?
I would get to know these guys, my guys.
So when you do like the first one, did you say, "Oh, here's Bob Smith"? Did you look up his story and then? So I mean, as you're cleaning, or as the days?
I looked up the regiment. There's something called the Adjutant General of Illinois records of Civil War veterans, and it has all the units from Illinois and all the companies, and you can find him in there, and it has where he enlisted, when he enlisted, what became of him when he mustered out or left wounded or killed. Every now and then he hit one that deserted.
And then you have ones where they don't have any family left, right? You said that some of these people don't have any people
Most
left.
of these don't have families. If they have not been cleaned, if it's a Civil War guy, I don't know if there's family or not. I clean them automatically. And there's even a couple from it says Cuba on them, and Spanish American. They're a very similar stone. I'll clean those too.
Okay.
If it's clearly. And then there are some that are buried with their wives. In 1885, the wives and daughters got involved. The Sons got involved, were created in 1881. as they recognize that as time and death and infirmity took its toll on the ranks, because the Grand Army was self-limiting. You had to have served in the blue. There was no way to buy your way in.
Okay.
So when the last one was gone, the last one was gone. And they had in their national convention, they said, we want Memorial Day to continue. And the day is coming when it will be done by others or not done at all. So they enlisted the firstborn son in the family of a veteran, and eventually became any son of a veteran. They were enlisted, and they were trained in the processes of the funeral and the grave, the decoration day drills.
Do you know a gentleman named Tom Oestreicher? Tommy O's from?
Oh, I know Tom very well.
He wrote a book about the oldest Civil War, the last Civil War veteran. We had him living to 117. I forgot the book exactly how it played out, but like you said, it was important that they were worried that it had to continue, right?
Yeah, and the wives and daughters got involved in 1885, I think, in the Women's Relief Corps, and they assisted with what they called the campfire, which was a county-wide reunion, and it took place on the courthouse square before the monument was there.
I say before the monument, okay.
Yeah, and the monument came in 1897, and it was driven by the Grand Army. In fact, the flagpole right out here, outside the old library entrance, was dedicated by the Women's Relief Corps of the Merritt Simons Group in 1964.
Is that right?
Yeah. So when I see, they had their own grave marker too. The Grand Army has a 5-pointed star, and some will say GAR, some say FCNL, which was fidelity, loyalty, and charity, or fidelity, charity, and loyalty. And that's how they always closed their meetings. And that was their byword.
Okay. I learned about horses when I see statues of horses. I didn't realize it, and tell me if I'm wrong, that if they're on 3 legs, that person was killed in action, right? Is that?
That's what I've heard, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But with the markers, there's no indication that this person was killed in action per se, or
no, there is nothing like that. And the only military decoration during the war was the Congressional Medal of Honor. It started during the Civil War with the Andrews Raiders, the guys that went down and stole the Confederate locomotive. They gave them out rather generously, and then after the war, they took some of them back, saying, "Really, no, it didn't." Rise.
Oh, did they really? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But now let's go back to the cleaning, because if you know Steve Hartman, if you've ever seen him, he's on the Sunday morning show. He does all these feel-good segments. But he did one on a gentleman doing something similar to you, cleaning up the gravestones. And like I said, it was very labor-intensive that I saw what it took to do that. But what is it like when you're doing that, Harlan? It's got to be a magic feeling. And have you had people walk up on you while you were doing it?
We get a lot of dog walkers that come up and they'll look at me. What are you doing? And I explain, and they just kind of, interesting. But once I have gotten as much of the material removed as possible, I need to deal with that gray staining, and sometimes it doesn't come off. But there's a product called Wet and Forget. It's often used for, you get that green mold sometimes on the north side of your house,
right? Sure.
Or on your deck. That's what it's for. That is approved by the VA for this. So you mix it 5 to 1 with water, and put it in a garden sprayer, and then I soak the whole thing.
Okay.
And I move on to the next set. And I keep track of those, and I go back in maybe 10 days. And I do the drenching and the brushing and the wet. And you can bring them back often to this beautiful white stone again. And this time of year, this morning I went around, and the process of mowing and weed trimming often spits little bits of grass out.
Oh yeah, sure, yeah.
So that's I'm glad they do that, but I try to wash all that off.
Yeah, people forget that people used to picnic in the cemeteries, right? It would be a place to go to, and then you would picnic by the person that you lost there. Yeah. According to Dennis Mayer, if I'm saying the right, commander of the General E.F. Dutton Camp 49,
Mm-hmm.
said you have restored 48, and probably more now. That leaves less than 100 tombstones to go before he completes the first phase of his mission, meaning you. So tell us about that. So 100 right now is your goal, huh? 100
Well,
tombstones.
I'm closing in on 100 at this point.
All right, really?
Yeah, that's I probably have 65 or so complete. I have a record that I've kept, and those go back and just get a little maintenance cleanup every now and then, get the grass and the mud and the lichens off.
Okay.
But I've got about 15 more in process as of this morning, and I'll continue doing that. Sometimes it gets too hot, by latter part of July.
But here, your quote here is that I've got names of folks that are responsible for surrounding cemeteries. As I get through, I'm just going to keep on doing this. When I get through all 144 here, I'll find another nearby cemetery and start working on those guys as well.
Right.
So
There's the last DeKalb County veteran is buried in Oakwood. It's the cemetery kind of near the Elmwood house.
okay.
Tucked in
Oh, I know
behind
that
church.
cemetery. Yeah, in the back there. Yeah.
And that was George H. Gerler, as in Gerler Road, Gerler Dairy.
Oh, okay.
He died in 1940. He was the last one from DeKalb County. The last one from the Sycamore group is out in Ohio Grove, and I've got a call in. He's there with his twin who died at birth. He lasted until 1935.
Is that right?
Yeah, he's an interesting case. Marcellus Hall. He had to wait until he was 18 to enlist. That was 1865, January. War's almost over, and DeKalb County didn't have any openings. DeKalb County filled up very quickly. Curious thing about the Civil War, that you could buy a substitute. If you were drafted, didn't want to go,
You buy your way out of it.
buy
Yeah.
your way out of it. And Marcellus Jones was a substitute for a guy in Chicago who gave him, I think it was $500. It's a lot of money in 1865. And he went in the service, and he was in a one-year regiment.
Okay.
Many of them were three-year regiments. My great-great-grandfather was the 53rd Ohio was a three-year regiment, and then he, like many, re-enlisted to get the job done, because a lot of the guys that they got in 1864 and 1865 were not top of the line. As you read the records, they didn't want to be there, and many of them would. There was little way of tracking people.
Right.
The bounty jumpers, they would collect their money and leave. But there was a corps that were experienced and knew what they were doing, and they stayed throughout the war, even re-enlisting.
Wow. So where does this passion from you come from? I mean, I can see where you did this. Here, I'm going to do the 144 and get on with the rest of my life. But you've made this a lifelong commitment, it sounds like.
Well, it's it takes it's a day or two a week, and when the weather's nice.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what would happen. I don't want to use water out there on these stones when it's freezing. But
what a
guys-
rewarding thing to do.
these guys deserve to be remembered. That war kept this country together when things were really divided. We're not good now, but they were really divided then. And there was never any ambivalence about the cause. None of this lost cause or states' rights nonsense that came out of the South. It was the War of the Rebellion.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's how it was referred to as. It says here, Hawkins said members of the Grand Army Republic likely didn't think they served in a civil war. He pointed out historic records showed that the veterans thought the American conflict was, quote, the War of the Rebellion, unquote.
Yes. And there's even just south of Sandwich in a cemetery, a fellow who died in 1863. His grave marker says, killed in the slaveholders' rebellion. So they recognized
Wow.
it was an issue of slavery, and it was. And it got twisted toward the end. It would be interesting to know what the feelings were. 1913, 50th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. All the states wanted to, and Illinois included, they wanted to gather as many veterans of that battle you had to have fought there that day,
Yeah.
those 3 days, and send them back. And there were
Oh, wow.
perhaps a dozen from DeKalb County who received letters. 2 were Confederates.
Is that right?
Yes, they did not worry about which side you fought for. If you were living in DeKalb County and you were in
Wow.
Gettysburg the first 3 days of July in 1863, state of Illinois is going to give you $10 and pay your train ticket down there.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
What a story. And they did that. They
and
did
they
it.
did that.
From all the other, they all gathered there at
Yeah.
Gettysburg. Wow.
And there was a lot of disputes about can the Confederates bring their battle flags and things like that. But there was a fellow who's quoted in the Sycamore True Republican letter sent to the Grand Army that he's living in, I think, Georgia. And he said he listed about 18 or 20 members of the 105th Illinois killed in that Atlanta campaign. He said their graves are here, and I see to it that they are decorated every decoration day.
Wow.
And he lived and worked down there. So we had Confederates in DeKalb County. They had Yankees down in Georgia.
Well, the respect, I mentioned because I remember reading about when he surrendered, when Lee took the surrender from Grant, Grant from Lee, that they allowed the Southerners to keep their rifles and their horses, and they described the moment when Lee. I get emotional thinking about when Lee was riding away, and the Confederate, Northern soldiers stood at attention for him,
Yes, they did.
and I
Yes,
thought,
they
what a
did.
moment that must have been.
And it was the beginning of, well, I think the second.
The healing
inaugural.
began right there, right?
Right. And there was a lot of fractures yet to be healed. My buddy, Captain Richard Smith, my one-armed captain, he's 1875, he's still in Sycamore. And he's the captain of a group called the Union Guards, and they're meeting at the same hall as the Grand Army. And there's a couple letters from the Adjutant General of Illinois sending them rifles and saying, we need you veterans to be drilled just in case. And he says there's a new breech-loading rifles. It's the 4570 trapdoor rifle cartridge. And he said, and I would send you more, except we're having to equip a guards unit down in Williamson County where they are actively engaged against the Ku Klux Klan. And that's here in Illinois. And I'm thinking, what kind of emergency are they expecting in DeKalb County? But the state of Illinois was actively arming local veterans, led by my one-armed captain,
To battle the KKK.
if needed.
Really? Wow. Because I know they got really big after because Grant
Yes,
had. I
they
know that
did.
whole story. Yeah.
And they were big up until the 30s. But
Yeah, Michelle Donahue said there was a big KK rally here in Sycamore back in the day. Yeah.
yeah, just and it was in the paper, and it was billed as a big party, and it's almost unbelievable.
It really is.
So and I said that these records exist is doubly rare. In 1902, their meeting hall, which it was a great big 3-story rambling building called the Wilkins Building, and it stood where I think of it as the Henderson Building, the old department store there in Sycamore. It's now the Sycamore City
Right.
Building.
City building. Yeah.
Yeah, it stood same footprint practically, 3 stories. There were, I guess, law offices and clothing stores on the bottom floor. The Grand Army Hall was on the 2nd floor, and the cigar makers were on the 3rd floor, big tobacco warehouse up there. And in April of 1902, 1 in the morning, somebody started yelling fire. And this is 1902. These veterans are probably in their mid to late 60s, perhaps. 4 of them get a ladder, no flashlight, building on fire. They climb up into the 2nd floor, and they're rampaging around up there. They rescue their flag. They rescue they must have gotten the records, but their muskets, which were all in a rack, those burned, and they described how gunpowder used to come in these like 15-pound tin cans, and they would roll their own paper cartridges for salutes. And they said the gunpowder was detonating. And so these 4 old veterans probably reminded them of the war.
Oh, sure.
They gathered their stuff, and they must have gotten these records. And it was after that, they were sort of homeless as a unit for a couple of years, just meeting here and there. But the new courthouse was built, I think, in 1905, the courthouse we have now. And one of the county supervisors, H.C. Whittemore, talked to the county and said, can these guys use the third floor law library? And they said, yes, this can be your new memorial hall. And they met there, and there's notes. There was a very regimented layout of the room. And in some of the notes, they discussed changing the layout to bring everyone closer because they're having a hard time hearing.
Sure.
And then they got to the point where they couldn't climb the steps.
Oh, gosh.
And I think that's pretty much 1920, and they broke up.
Wow. What a story about the fire. Boy.
Yes, exactly. And it must have been a rough building by that time because the DeKalb Chronicle, the day after, the headline says, "Fire trap burns."
Oh,
so
they refer to it as a fire trap. Well, we're quickly out of time. Again, it's been so fast. I have a little surprise for you. Maybe you know this already. I found that when I was researching you, I found the Kankakee County Historic Preservation Commission. Are you familiar with the Limestone Cemetery?
No.
And it says the historical names is the Hawkins Cemetery.
Is that right?
I would show you that. It's in Kankakee.
Kankakee.
And I was thinking, well, how would that be appropriate for this gentleman to know that there's a Hawkins Cemetery?
Well, I'm going to go see that.
You're going to have to go there and clean some cemetery. But I'm just in awe of what you've done, Harlan. We don't have time. I was going to ask you about being on the Cortland Library Board, how important that is. But it's just amazing what you've done. Now, do you want help doing this? Do you want other people helping you do this?
I've had a couple people volunteer, and we're going to pursue that. That will help me get more done. And there is...
Or what about supplies? Can we help you pay for the supplies? How can people do that?
I just go to Farm and Fleet and buy my wet and forget.
The wet and forget.
Yeah, and I go through about a 3-gallon jug every year.
Okay.
And it is a labor of love, and it's one of these things. I appreciate what these guys did. And
well, it's one thing to say that, but you're actually putting that in the motion there because I respect veterans immensely, but I can't name one thing specifically I've done to help them, and for you to do this on a daily or a weekly basis is just amazing.
And one of the guys I worked on this morning was Elias C. West. His father was a notable abolitionist in Mayfield, and in fact, there's a photograph of him with a wagon, and he's standing there and he's holding his rifle, and it was one of those sort of just come and mess with me. I mean, this was before the Civil War, when to be on the Underground Railroad was a federal crime. I mean, the Fugitive Slave Act.
Mm-hmm.
But he was not shy about standing there with his rifle. And we haven't found his grave yet. But his son is there, Elias C. West, who served the whole war in the 105th. And his wife, Ella, is buried next to him. She was in the Women's Relief Corps. And one of the last notes in the book, it's a newspaper article that was cut out and clipped in there. There was about 6 veterans that were meeting at Elias West's house in Sycamore. And he made the comment that all their wives were there, and it listed off how many decades they'd been married. He said, "We can't say that our fighting was over when the Civil War ended, but we're still married."
That's great. Well, again, it's just been such a pleasure. It's just a wonderful thing that you're doing, and I know you've changed so many people's lives. I'm sure the families that know, but just other veterans to know that you're doing that we do remember and we do care, and you continue to do that. So I can't thank you enough. I wish I had something to give. If it was a fancy Johnny Carson show, I'd have something fancy to give you, but other than my respect and admiration, which you have, and I know the community as well. So
the opportunity to talk about the Sons and the work we do out there, and just these veterans in general, they put it all on the line, and many of them paid it all. And others, they suffered for years with this, drinking. you read the pension reports and lots of GI issues and lung issues, respiratory issues. They sat around these smoky campfires and just they were young men who were their whole lives were changed because of what they did.
Yeah.
And they abolished slavery. They put blood and sweat on the line to abolish slavery.
That's what I wanted to end on. It reminded me of that the great quote from you at the end of these articles here. Which one is it right here with the where you say, and this is quoting you, "It's a very worthy cause not just to restore the Union, but most importantly to remove the awful policy of slavery," Hawkins said. "It was the North that did that, and it was the Grand Army that did that." So we got to remember that, right?
And for the middle of the 19th century, it was rare that a fraternal organization was integrated. And it was never an issue of black and white. It was an issue of blue. And these posts were open to black veterans if they wore the uniform. Potter Post and Sycamore had two that I know of. Henry Beard, whose grandchildren, descendants, still returned to the North Grove School, where he joined the unit 105th in Nashville and served throughout the entire war. I think if I was an emancipated slave and I joined this group and they headed south, I'd be thinking, that's the wrong direction.
Right. I don't want to go that way.
But he did. And when the war was over, he so respected these men and they respected him. He went to Texas, got his bride, came up here, lived in DeKalb County. He's buried in Fairview. He joined the Potter Post. Then there's John Briggs, who was a horse whisperer of a sort. He was just a marvel with horses. He was in a Wisconsin unit, but he lived in DeKalb and joined the Grand Army. I don't know of any other fraternal organization that had black and white members walking.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow. Again, you are a wealth of information. Harlan Hawkins has been our guest again. We thank you again for what you do. You are a true patriot, sir, and we thank you for what you do. And we hope we have you back again real soon because, again, you are a wealth of information. I had to cut you off here because I want to keep this under an hour, but it's been a pleasure talking to you about your history, and thank you for what you've done.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you very much.
That's T.D. Ryan Unleashed, podcast number 57.